BloombergQuint. We are now joined in this conversation with Mr. Abizer Diwanji of EY. What we're talking about is the cabinet's approval of a 30,600 crore worth of government guarantee towards the National Asset Reconstruction Company Limited, or the NARCL. Now, this is the Indian version of a bad bank. Essentially, this entity is going to buy about 2 lakh crore worth of bad loans from the banking industry, try and resolve this over a period of 5 years, and whatever shortfall comes in terms of recovery of these loans will be covered by this government guarantee. Mr. Diwanji, firstly, welcome. Let me first start to talk about the operational side of the story. Now, obviously, these 2 lakh crore worth of loans are not valued at 2 lakh crore. These are all bad loans, and some of these have been bad loans for a very long time. Just wanted to get a sense from you, what are we talking about in terms of valuation? Is there any sense as to how much these things are actually worth?
So I think these valuations will be done, Vishwanath, over time, and the process must be on already, I'm sure. But there will then not only be a valuation, but after the valuation, there will be a Swiss auction, because there's an RBI ruling which says you need to conduct an auction to make sure the pricing is right. So there will be an auction to make sure the pricing is right, and then the pricing can go anywhere, frankly. So this is where I don't think there is certainty on pricing as yet.
Right. Because during the briefing, Debashish Panda, the finance secretary, was talking about an 18% weighted average sort of valuation there. That's as per an internal calculation of NARCL. Of course, all of this gets clarified when the asset sale actually happens. But do you think that valuation is valid? I mean, is that something that's a good enough price?
So first of all, one does not have access to the full list. So it's difficult to put a number whether that number is right or not. And nor has the government attempted to put a number to it, frankly. With 2 lakh crores of assets, they've given 30,000 crores of guarantee. So at the end of the day, they just put a guarantee number which is roughly 15% of the total outstanding. And they said, okay, we've got this pool available. Now let's see what individual assets get valued at. So I think valuation is less of a concern now, Shravan.
Sure. Okay. So let me come to the announcement, actually, which was regarding the guarantee. And this is something that the banking industry was waiting for, because unless this goes ahead, you can't really enforce the NARCL. Just trying to get a sense from you, there has been this point of moral hazard that has been raised since the beginning. Should the government be backing a private transaction between a bank and a borrower, essentially the recovery that comes out of it? Where do you stand on that, sir?
So I don't think the government is guaranteeing anybody private. The government is guaranteeing a public sector organization called NARCL. And it's not even guaranteeing the NARCL, by the way. It's actually guaranteeing a transaction done by the NARCL.
Right.
But what they are really guaranteeing is the 85% SRs.
Yeah.
That NARCL's trust will be issuing back to the bankers in return for getting the exposures themselves.
Sure.
Effectively, it is protecting the public sector banks and the private sector banks who sell the assets. It's a depositor protection that is being offered against the fair value of the assets to guarantee the recovery of the fair value of the asset as determined through an auction process.
Sure. Another point that I wanted to raise was when we're talking about the NARCL putting up 15% of whatever is the net asset value here, the value at which the asset is being sold, where does this capital come from? Because its capital base is not that big as of now. I mean, it's a few hundred crores in.
What's been announced is that a few companies, the banks have joined, a few others more will join, and there will be a capital call on them. And that capital call will effectively fund the 15% cash. It's only a bank transaction. The government hasn't contributed anything except for the 30,600 crore guarantee that's going to be available. Sure. So the capital is contributed by the banks, and that pool of capital will be used to fund the 15%, because 1585 is ARC norm set by the Reserve Bank of India. And it says that the ARC has to buy assets for cash for a minimum of 15% of the value. So effectively, what the NARCL will do is actually abide by the rule. Funding of that will come from the banks itself.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. But when we're talking about the management of these assets now, the government has given a very clear 5-year timeline. They've said that beyond 5 years, my guarantee is not going to be worth anything. Is that enough? Because the historical results with respect to asset recovery or resolution have not typically met this 5-year timeline if you remove IBC from the equation?
Yeah, well, so now IBC is in the equation, so that should be useful. But what I must say is that I think a lot of meticulous planning will go into how one plans the resolution of these assets. And I think a 5-year period is good enough to turn around any company, because if it doesn't turn around in 5 years, it possibly won't.
Right.
So I do believe that it forces the platform, NARCL, IDMC platform, to actually deliver a tangible turnaround plan or a tangible auction process to dispose of an asset within the 5-year period. And because there is a guarantee attached to it, and the banks are very keen that their guaranteed amounts are received by them, they will force a lot of execution on the platform. I see a lot of activism from the shareholder bankers, who are also the contributors to the ARC, as in terms of assets.
But to be fair, they don't really need to do anything. I mean, essentially, they could wait for 5 years and get that 30,600 that the government is giving.
Well, they can, but I think the hope will be, one is that there's also a self-building mechanism here. There is a success fee structure as to when the asset gets recovered. So the IDMC and the NARCL itself are motivated enough to earn a better return. Mind you, the same banks are the shareholders. So they also want to earn a return
on the investment
they have made themselves. So, commercial logic will require them to try and resolve the assets at the earliest possible.
Okay, fair enough. Talking about the IDMCL that you mentioned, I mean, so what the finance minister was saying is that this is going to be a professionally managed company, largely owned by the private sector. There's also going to be some amount of government oversight in the way they do things, purely to extend any kind of support. How do you create an entity in a market where there is so much disparate talent, and the level of success is also as disparate as the talent out there in the market? So how do you ensure that all of this comes together in one company and goes towards this one goal?
So I think there is an active consultant model that IDMC should and will follow. They will use O&M consultants, they will use investment bankers, and a host of other people who will then be supporting the core team between NARCL and IDMC.
Sure.
And ideally, they will get the right talent that they need for resolving the assets.
Okay.
In terms of the disparate recoveries, I think because this is an organization which is focused only on recoveries, and so are some of our ARCs, by the way, but I think ARCs were not created with that mindset. They were a fee mindset company. Here, what has been done is that the fee is now on a sliding scale downwards.
Sure.
So fee becomes less important. You will make some initial fee, but then taper off. Idea is to actually create capital gains out of sale of assets or revival of assets.
Okay.
And I think that should lead to the success of the model. The framework is there.
Okay.
Implementation, of course, is tested.
This proposal to charge a guarantee fee by the government, which is starting at 0.25 and then increasing annually. I'm just trying to get a sense of, is that a good enough disincentive for the NARCL and the IDMCL to actually try and wrap up things quickly?
So the guarantee fee is going to be charged to the NARCL.
Right.
And the NARCL then becomes the agency which will also have a fair amount of oversight on the IDMC, or at least work together with the IDMC.
Yeah.
Because the economics are interlinked between the two. And I think, again, with a sliding scale upwards guarantee commission, the structure is that economically, this whole platform would become less profitable if resolution is delayed.
Right.
But the flexibility is there that if you are able to get a gain higher than what the fees you are losing, still there may be a decision enough to say that I will delay within the 5 years, of course, but I'll delay the resolution because my net gain, expected gain out of a delayed but a more structured resolution is better than a quicker resolution.
Right.
So I think the economics is played out quite well. But still, of course, the whole game is in the execution.
Okay, let me zone out a little bit and try and ask you a broader question with respect to this whole bad bank idea. Now, this is not new. This concept of having a bad bank which can take over bad loans from banks and then try and resolve it internally so that banks are free to do lending and borrowing and deposits. That has been there since at least for the last few years. It has always been shunned. Is this now the right time with the level of provisions that we have with banks to include something like this?
If you rewind back your channel, I would have said it 3 years back that bad bank was a better proposition even then.
Yeah.
But sooner than later, I think we really need a bad bank because aggregation is something that we face a huge issue on. And the sooner we are able to aggregate loans for a better resolution, the better we are. So I don't think there's any late timing for an aggregated resolution.
Sure.
I do think that maybe even more current assets, more current NPAs rather, if we could actually aggregate them and push it to a bad bank, it's not such a bad idea.
That was going to be my next question, because what is this NARCL? How long does it last? Because if you look at international experiences, typically entities that come up are event-based. There's a sudden spike in NPAs for banks, so you create an entity which can warehouse it and resolve it. And then once that is done, it shuts down. That entity goes away. Is the NARCL just for this 5 years, or can it exist as an enterprise?
I think again, from whatever I've read in the press, I think it is supposed to be a 5-year SPV. Because there is some need to do the resolutions quickly.
Right.
But I think depending on how it pans out, I think, and depending on how our economy fares and to what extent we still have bad spending, I think there will be an ability to get NARCL to continue, or more so, even if NARCL does not continue, if it inculcates the ethos of resolution in the balance ARCs that exist in the private sector, I think the job is done.
Resolution is one thing, but private entities also have a problem with capital. I mean, not all of them are continuously funded by banks.
I don't believe that's the case. I believe there is ample and more capital available for the right resolution providers. Maybe the issue is that we don't have enough good resolution providers. Right. I mean, you look at, we have 28 ARCs. The top 4 ARCs have 73% of the market share. So they have the capital.
Okay, fair enough. Lastly, I just wanted to understand from you, because this seems to be pricking me a little bit about, is this an optical management of the bad loan situation, or is there something solid that comes out of this whole process?
I'm sure that's not the intent, because it doesn't matter. The banks have most of them fully provided for.
Yes.
Really, it doesn't matter. So I don't think it's an accounting game. So there's no need to be optical about it. I think there is a sincere effort to make sure that there is aggregation and there is concentration of skill set in terms of resolution to one platform. It seems to be the intent. But I think unless we have effective resolution strategies, this will become a parking vehicle. We should aim not to have.
Fair enough, sir. Thank you so much, Mr. Diwanji, for joining us on this conversation and taking us through all of these details. And thank you so much for watching.